Hi, everyone. I'm Evan Ross Katz. I am a podcast host and cultural commentator who is extremely privileged to be joined today by my friend, Marti Gould Cummings. And we're going to have a discussion about politics in the LGBTQ community. And Marti is the perfect person to be having this conversation with. So I'm really honored. Marti, hi.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. I'm really happy to be a part of Oasis 2020, particularly to be in conversation with you because, as many people within our community know, we really look to you as such a leader and an educator and an activist. So much of my understanding of politics comes from following you on social media. So I want to start by asking you about a recent tweet of yours. You said, quote, "Stop fucking misgendering me. I'm really sick of it." What are some of the unique challenges trans and non-binary individuals face when it comes to equality?
Yeah, I think something important to highlight is how you look or present doesn't necessarily have to correlate with how you identify. And I think a lot of times people, especially for non-binary people, this is from my experience, for non-binary people, they think, oh, well, you out of drag, often present as like a cis guy, so that's what you are. And I'm like, no, like I do not identify as male or female. I do not know how many times I have to say this to make it clear. And I understand, like, if you don't know me, I'm perfectly fine with being like, oh, hi, it's nice to meet you. Actually, my pronouns are they, them. But what's frustrating, the reason that tweet came about is because oftentimes people just continue, who know me, who know how I identify, just think it's not a big deal. And it is a big deal because when you misgender somebody and say, oh, whatever, it's not a big deal, you are telling that person that they are not valid, that their identity is not valid to you. And if my identity is not valid to you, then you don't support me or have my back. And that is a microaggression, right? Like that is something that's going to be, if you don't have my back in my personal life like that, how do I know you're going to have my back when you're voting? How do I know you're going to have my back when you're giving money to an organization or who you're supporting? And for our trans community, a lot of trans people might not have the financial capability to go through procedures where they can be what society deems passable or whatever, right? So we have to be respectful of people's pronouns, whether they're non-binary or trans, living that experience. You're taking away someone's humanity by not valuing their pronouns. And so that's, I had been fed the F up when
She
I
has
tweeted
had
that. I
it.
had it because it's like people like in politics, people I interact with, I'm like, okay. Like I do not know how many times I have to tell you, I am a non-binary person. My pronouns are they, them. I do not identify as male or female. Do you want me to like write it in the sky? Like, what do I have to do?
Right.
You know?
So you've been a board member with AFC for quite some time now. Can you sort of detail what made you first become aware of AFC and then what made you want to work with them?
Oh my gosh. I love AFC so much. I've been on their board for about 2 years, but I've been working with them for about 12. I actually got involved with AFC through how we met. My ex boyfriend, Anthony, was in the revival cast of Hair on Broadway many years ago. And he got linked up with AFC through the Broadway beauty pageant, and which is an event they used to do. And so I met Will Fisher, who used to work in events at AFC, and Will kind of introduced me to Linda Simpson, and I was like starting my drag experience at that time, and so we became friends. And Will was like, oh, you're super fun. Would you be interested in learning more about AFC? And I was like, 100%, let's do this. And so Anthony and I started doing concerts at the Duplex to raise money for AFC. And then I started working on the planning committee for Oasis, which is the event we're doing today. And then through that, started joining other events with AFC to now, a decade later, I'm on their board. I think they're the most incredible organization. And I'm super proud to be a part of it.
And how vital would you say is it to have safe spaces like AFC for LGBTQ plus youth?
It's incredibly vital, especially, I think it was a week or two ago, the Trump administration rolled out some policy about how shelters can turn people away just for perceiving someone to be trans. And they gave indicators on what a trans person looks like. And our shelter system, even without that coming from Trump, our shelter system is already very dangerous for trans and non-binary people. And so to have a safe space where LGBTQIA plus people who are experiencing homelessness can go is crucial. It's vital. We need to make sure that we're protecting the most vulnerable among us. And oftentimes these young people are kicked out of their homes just for being who they are. And AFC not only does housing services, but their drop-in center has meals, educational resources and programs, job placement and training programs. There's so much work in addition to housing that happens. It's also community building, Oftentimes queer people, we make our families on our own because our own families may not accept us for who we are. And so the Ali Forney Center is a place that builds family and community and therefore a safe space.
Absolutely. Now, what are some of the greatest challenges that you would say are facing the LGBTQ plus community? I know you just mentioned, for instance, Trump and his entire administration has been no friend to the trans community, as many of us are well aware. So what would you say when you're and obviously there are a great many challenges, so I don't mean this to be an exhaustive list because we could go on for days, but what are some of the biggest challenges that you see us facing?
I mean, LGBTQIA plus people are facing challenges, not just in this country, but around the world. We saw in Chechnya, there were the concentration camps. Now in Poland, what's happening in Poland is devastating. But we have an administration here that is actively working to roll back the rights of queer people. And, we luckily had that Supreme Court decision recently in our favor, but there are over 200 bills in state legislative bodies across this country that are directly transphobic, anti-trans. So how you vote in a federal election is, yes, very important, but local politics on the city and state level are just as important, if not more important, because they're going to be impacting quality of life, day-to-day life. And if there are bills in city and state legislative bodies that are working to be transphobic, we have to stand up and take a look at what these legislators, who we're voting for. So those are things that I think are facing our community. I think also, what I talked about earlier, how you present doesn't necessarily correlate with how you identify. And I think there's a lot of transphobia, non-binary phobia. I don't know if that's like a word, but there's a lot of inner community hate from like cis privileged gay people. And what is that saying? Like, none of us have equality, and so we all do. Like, it reminds me of when Sylvia Rivera stood up at a rally and was booed for being trans. We're still facing that. We need to listen to our elders and the leaders who came before us, and the leaders who gave us the rights we have today are Black and Latinx trans people. And I think it's so important to uplift those voices, especially as trans people, Black and brown trans people, are being murdered at alarming rates. And we have the list of names, but those are the ones that we know. How many police departments and hospitals and funeral directors and families misgendered people who were murdered? And so we may not even know what happened,
Right. Now, we're lucky in a sense right now to have more LGBTQ plus politicians in office now than ever before. However, that number is still extremely small. Thankfully, we have people like you running for office. Why is it so important for LGBTQ plus people to support LGBTQ plus people in office?
Yeah, I mean, I, like a lot of people, I took for granted living in New York, thinking, well, my vote doesn't really matter. It's whatever. But this Trump administration is horrible. But the positive is so many people, myself included, were woken up to we have to be political. We have no choice but to be political. It is imperative that every single one of us is political. And I'm so honored to have been endorsed by the Victory Fund. And one of the things they always talk about is how in this country, and I always say this statistic because I think it's really important. In our country, there are, from the lowest elected position to the White House, there are 500,000 people who have been elected to serve in various positions in this country. Out of those 500,000 people, just under 800 of them identify as LGBTQIA+, which means it's 0.0001% of electeds are queer. So to have true equal representation at the table, we need to elect over 20,000 queer people. I'm a non-binary candidate. There are only 8 non-binary electeds in the whole country. There's never been one in the city or state of New York. And having that voice at the table is hugely important for specific reasons of what we talked about earlier, like talking about misrepresentation, not respecting pronouns, you know? We need to have, I filled out an endorsement packet recently where the word non-binary was not even listed once on this packet. And I'm like, you say you're progressive, but everything is within the male-female spectrum. And that's wrong. There are many, many genders. So that's why queer representation is important, because we need all of our voices represented at the table.
What advice do you have for an LGBTQ plus person who's interested in pursuing being in office in some sense, but doesn't kind of know the beginning steps to take to sort of get involved?
I mean, getting involved in politics is like overwhelming, right? It's super scary, but it doesn't have to be. I think I'm getting it from like all sides in politics now, you know? But that's the problem with politics. We use these attack mechanisms and go after people instead of bringing people to the table and saying, okay, you've never been in politics. You may have never voted before, but you now want to get in politics. You are welcome at the table. You are welcome here. Your voice is valued and valid. Let's work together to educate and be inclusive so people feel comfortable at the table. So my advice to queer people who want to get into politics is don't let anybody tell you you're not welcome. Don't let anybody tell you that your voice doesn't belong here because of your experience or lack of experience in politics. That when people say, oh, you're a drag queen, what experience do you have in politics? I have the experience of being a gig worker who struggles paycheck to paycheck, wondering how I'm going to pay my bills some month, struggling with my gender identity to finally feel comfortable to say, this is the missing link I've had my whole life. This is what I've been missing. This is who I am. You know, having the experience of being an American, which means I don't have health care, you know? So every life experience you have is valid and welcome at the table. So queer people, if you want to be in politics, if you want to run for office, no one has the power to tell you you don't belong, because you do.
I love it. I'm going to go run for politics right now. So 2 quick last questions. One, do you have any advice for people that want to dye their hair blonde in quarantine?
Okay, this was not supposed to be blonde. Okay, this was pink. I dyed it for my birthday because I turned 33, and I was like, oh my God, I'm old enough to have a teenage child. I had a little like early midlife crisis, and so I dyed my hair pink, and it was bright, beautiful pink, but it's faded, so I have to get it done again. So my advice is do whatever hair color makes you feel fabulous.
That's great advice. And last, where can people go to learn more about you and your candidacy?
Sure. You can visit my campaign website, which is martiformanhattan.com, or my drag website, martigcummings.com. And on all social media, it's Marti G. Cummings. And shoot me a DM, send me a message. I'm always happy to answer questions. And yeah.
Well, Marti, thank you so much. It's an honor to know you and get to call you a friend. And I'm really glad we had this opportunity to chat. And I hope anyone that watches this will use this and seeing Marti as an opportunity to learn more about Marti and his candidacy and kind of become more politically active as an LGBTQ person and become aware of the fact that our votes really do matter and can change the course of history. So Thank you all so much, and specifically, thank you, Marti.
Thank you. Donate to AFC.
Agreed.